And while we wait for yet more conversations on the red carpet, in studio, I have a complete set of different guests now. Political analyst on my immediate left, Dr. Rekgotsofetse Chikane, and Professor Kwandiwe Kondlo. Gentlemen, to both of you, thank you very much for making time for this important occasion, the State of the Nation Address 2025. Let me start with you, Dr. Chikane. The matters of the United States, I think that ratcheting up today with the statements of the U.S. Secretary of State that he is no longer coming to the minister or to the summit of the foreign ministers. You then also have the DRC matter on the table. Today we're getting a statement from the National Defence Force that the repatriation process is delayed. Do you think that these two issues have somehow cast a shadow over this State of the Nation address?
So I think these two geopolitical issues really showcase or give the Government of National Unity in particular an opportunity to showcase themselves at an international level. We've kind of seen this government over the last 2 years dictate themselves on a national and an international platform, really talking about fighting for human rights at a global level, really being that voice, trying to become that moral compass South Africa used to be just after 1994 and trying to reclaim that space. But it is a lot easier when the target isn't directly pointed in your direction, when countries start posing questions about what is happening in your own country, what are the policies that you're taking. And I think it needs a level of maturity from our government going forward, whether it is the DRC, whether it is continued cases with the ICJ, whether it is now this new force called President Donald Trump, about who are the grown-ups in the room, really, in a time in which you need grown-ups at an international level. And I think this is going to be an interesting test for the GNU about it was easier just after the elections because you had to agree with each other. But as you move away from that moment of elections, as we get closer to 2026, the need to agree with each other lessens and lessens. But that shouldn't impact the country's foreign policies. And it will be interesting to see how they go about that for the next year.
Professor Kondlo, we're going to bring matters closer to the continent, but at international level, there has been this word bandied about that there is change, and this is change that Donald Trump is dreaming of almost rearranging the world. Do you think that, yes, he has the world's attention by virtue of the powerful nature of the country that he runs, but is that kind of attention deserved, you think?
Well, Donald Trump does have the attention of the world. He is the president of one of the most powerful countries in the world, the largest economy globally, followed by China. So he does get the attention of the world. And he's actually pressing very sensitive buttons to get more attention globally. And one of them is the new protectionism that he is bringing back on the table. The tit for tat that is going to happen in global political economy, I don't want to think about it, because at the end of the day, it's going to affect the economies of many countries, with South Africa included. But at the same time, I think even if he's getting the attention globally, Mr. Trump, I would actually advise South Africa, especially our president, to try combine diplomacy with strategy. He needs to look beyond the Trump term, you see, because Trump is there for probably 4 years if he finishes his term. So that is why it's going to be very important that South Africa develops a global strategy which looks beyond the immediate turmoil.
Can I disturb your thought process quickly?
Yes.
If he finishes the 4 years, what do you think could possibly happen that Trump wouldn't be able to finish his term?
Americans usually have a mid-term review, isn't it so? Yes, and I think he is slowly building up his enemies, Mr. Trump.
Even within?
Even within the U.S., even within the party that he comes from. He's slowly building up his enemies. And most importantly, he created enemies from the very word go with the judiciary. You see? So the situation could turn out to be very tough for Mr. Trump. That's why I'm saying our guys must pursue diplomacy, combine it with strategy, but continue with the calm that our president is showing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You seem to agree, Dr. Chikane, that the approach of President Ramaphosa is the way to go for now.
So I think the approach for now, as the head of the G20 for this year, has to be a balancing act of differing interests in order for South Africa's interests to be pushed ahead. But it doesn't mean you must now forego future interests by conceding a lot right now, essentially. So things you don't want is the United States, and it's not just Donald Trump. There's a culture that is built in the United States, a new form of right that won't necessarily disappear with Donald Trump. It was there before him with the Tea Party, and it just became worse when the Tea Party found a face in the name of President Donald Trump, and it will emerge into something else. So the question then becomes, if that form of politics in the United States stays in which they can be easily swayed by misinformation, they can be easily persuaded into more unusual forms of diplomatic relations with other countries, the question then becomes, how does South Africa engage in that, whilst also trying to balance our own politics as well? And that's going to be a tough one.
Can I ask you this question?
Yeah.
Where do you think the source of this focused attention on South Africa comes from? Is it choreographed in order to destabilize South Africa's presidency of the G20? Is that where you think this is?
So I think there's multiple avenues. So one that's very, very clear is AfriForum's work over the last 10 years now. So it isn't a recent thing. AfriForum first started going to the United States in 2016, 2017, doing a lot of lobbying work on Congress, really pushing this messaging when the expropriation issue came to Parliament all the way back then. You then have a combination of the South African government taking Israel to the ICJ that moved us onto this platform of this moral compass. And then you have this issue of what does Donald Trump do with this messaging that they're getting with Elon Musk on one side, the messaging from AfriForum, this issue of the ICJ case, and all roads lead back to South Africa in one way or another. And it becomes an easy punching bag for him to essentially flex his muscles and see if we flinch, as he's doing with many other countries in the world right now.
Professor Kondlo, I want to change tack now and focus on the continent. Eastern DRC, there's a flare-up there. There's renewed fighting. Our soldiers, fallen soldiers, have not been repatriated. That statement this afternoon dropping, suggesting that that repatriation is now conducted under the UN, or is being facilitated by the UN, and it is delayed. And I'm saying this with the parade that we are seeing. A parliamentarian, Julius Malema, saying perhaps we shouldn't have the military guard of honor this year, given what has happened. Let me start you there. Do you think that that is indeed, he's on the money, that we shouldn't actually be parading?
That's a difficult one, Claudia. That's a difficult one in the sense that it depends really on the symbolism that we would like to accord as a gesture, you see, to the fallen soldiers at the DRC. But the other difficulty is that these guys were there not as the army of South Africa, but as part of a United Nations troops, you see.
And the SADC.
And the SADC,
Nation,
yes. When something like this happens in that situation, in that context, then how do you, as the country where these soldiers come from, mourn and really show sympathy for what has happened to them? Will cancelling the parade by the army really be enough as a gesture to show that we are really in solidarity with the families from where these soldiers come from? So it's really a difficult one, and I wish Mr. Malema actually raised it as a point for discussion with other political parties, and the ANC included.
We know, Dr. Chikane, that there is going to be a debate on the general state of the South African National Defence Force. I think that's on Monday. Whilst that is still going to come, your thoughts on what has been suggested, that there be a reduced number for this military guard of honor?
So there's 2 points there for consideration. The first one is, I think South Africans have to be very well aware that the funding to the SANDF in general has been decreasing for a very, very long time now. And the SANDF has been really trying hard to do 10-year reviews around what defense policy in the country should be looking like. So that's the first point, that this conversation that's going to take place is quite important for national security going forward. In terms of repatriation, I think, indeed, the choice is really a symbolic one, right? But the symbolic choice is important in South Africa. It really showcases what the mood of the country is when it comes to our position on the continent, our position for our soldiers who are on the continent, who've been on the continent and working alongside the SADC as well as the UN for longer than I've been alive now, right? So it's, and we never pay attention to the military because we don't think we're fighting any wars.
Yeah.
Our position around our military really becomes a proxy for our position as how do we believe about national security in South Africa in general. And that's something that we need to take seriously. So I agree with the sentiment of there has to be some sort of symbolic gesture. What it is, I'm not entirely sure, but we do need one.
The stature of the SANDF on the continent, Professor Kondlo, do you think that that has been affected in any way? Because let's remember that these casualties in Eastern DRC are not the first. We were in the Central African Republic, I think that was in 2013, where we suffered casualties there as well. More and more of these coming, does that reduce the standing of the South African National Defence Force?
Well, I think the perceptions about the South African National Defence Force in the continent, they're a bit mixed. You do get the sentiment that, I mean, I speak to some of the guys. Yeah? They say, look, why is South Africa there? South Africa needs to pause and rebuild the army. That's what one guy from Chad said to me. He said, but South Africans need to focus on one. They must rebuild the army because this army used to be the strongest in the continent. So you do feel, you do get a sense that other people think we're really forcing matters when we're actually part of all these deployments in conflict areas in the continent. But others, of course, there is a strong feeling that we are losing this stature. The South African Defence Force is losing stature. Yeah. But at the same time, it's doing a good job.
Dr. Chikane, I want to conclude on the SANDF/DRC matter with the upcoming SADC summit. It's the SADC meeting with its East African bloc. Yes. Basically, President Kagame and President Tshisekedi are going to come face to face for the very first time since these latest clashes. Do you think a solution might come about? Let's remind you that the SADC chair, Mnangagwa, has called for a ceasefire.
So I don't, and I don't think anyone should hold their breath. There are a variety of underlying issues that are driving this conflict that even a ceasefire won't necessarily resolve. It's the question about whether the representative of a state is willing to talk to a non-state actor in the first place. Right? If we're not talking to the boots on the ground in Eastern Africa who've just taken over the city, I think it's Goma, right? If you're not talking to them directly in any particular way, it doesn't matter what the heads of state say to each other, right? And we've gone through this multiple times over the last decade now when it comes to Eastern DRC. So the announcement for a call for a ceasefire doesn't necessarily change things if something material, if the material conditions on the ground don't change in Eastern DRC as well. If there isn't a compromise about what do you do with Goma? What do you do with the natural resources there? How do you regulate the natural resources leaving the country in the first place? How is it possible that there are other countries who are buying these resources, and who are they? If you can't answer those questions, you never really get to the root cause of the problem. So I am not holding my breath for a permanent ceasefire. You might have a temporary one, but not one that will last past this year unless those issues are addressed.
Professor Kondlo, let's then get to grips with the internal dynamics inside the country now. The president is going to address the State of the Nation address for the very first time as head of a GNU government, no longer an ANC-led government. Do you think that that has registered first with the ANC in how they have been conducting themselves?
Yeah, well, the ANC has continued to be a bit arrogant about the fact that they continue to be a majority. Even if they could make the numbers to form a government. Yeah, you still get that bit of arrogance.
In what way? Talk to us about this,
yeah,
this arrogance.
When you hear them talk about the ANC program, which comes from the 6th administration, you see, and they'll really emphasize that a lot of these issues actually are a continuation from the 6th administration, you see. So which basically means even if they are not the majority to form a government, they still have some kind of upper hand, you see. So you find that. But I think in the State of the Nation address, the president is, I think the template is going to be the same, even if the nuance is going to be slightly different.
Yeah.
It will be the same in the sense that I'm expecting the president to, as usual, begin with a lot of praises for what the government has done. Yeah, it's talking positively about what they inherited from the 6th administration as a basis for the work of the 7th administration. Something which I don't think other members of the GNU would actually like. But I think he will do that because he has a job to also please the ANC, you see. Even though he's the head of a government of national unity, he comes from the ANC,
yeah.
you see. And he has some duty towards them, yes. So I think the speech will be wall to wall. He'll try to cover everything that has happened. And in some way, I think he might throw a word or two talking positively about the government of national unity.
Yeah. Dr. Chikane, developments this afternoon.
Yes.
That the president consulted his GNU partners only this afternoon for their inputs into the speech. So talk to us about that, whether you think that there is something to talk about there or the president is managing this GNU very well.
Yeah, so I would encourage your viewers to look at our colleague's early address on your show earlier today, I think with Michelle Craig, where he laid out the usual process of creating this speech in government, the step-by-step from the ANC's Rekgotsofetse to the January 8 statement, to Cabinet Rekgotsofetse, and then the speech, which worked when you were in power. But now you don't have power, at least you don't have absolute power. And there's a need to now consult with your partners. And we started seeing the tension of this consultation over the last 3 weeks or so, for those who've been paying attention. And it's really been about what will become the program of government. And this becomes the important point, that this speech is different from the past. That in the past, it was the program of the government of the ANC, but now it is the program of a government of 10 different parties who all have competing interests. And there is that need for a balancing act. So you now write the speech hoping to have a balancing act, but then you only tell your partners the day of the speech. When do you edit? When do you change? So it poses all these questions about maybe now we're realizing why there's so many tensions in the GNU, why there's so much disagreement on key policies, why they always leave it for so late in the game, that this culture of negotiations has really not entrenched itself in the GNU and becomes quite important about how you do that going forward to create a more stable government. Not that it's not stable now.
Although the DA may not be the biggest complainant in this late consultation, because they do seem to have a lot of attention from the president.
Yeah, so the DA is playing...
Are they the dominant partner here?
So the DA is playing such a fascinating role that I'm writing about now, about how the DA is the official opposition of government inside government, which is a fascinating position to be in, right? To take that culture of where you were before, to bring that to essentially say, we'll be the guard dog for whatever ANC policies happen inside a government I am already in. And a lot of that is the posture, as Prof was saying, if the ANC is arrogant and is still going to continue in the way that it did in the past of, here's a policy, we believe in it, this is government's policy, without consulting with stakeholders. The greatest example now is the NHI agreement that was reached at the last second. The question is, how do you reach that agreement on the week of the speech? That should be something that should have been ironed out a month ago. So now you're talking about the particularities of how you're going to announce it, not we're still negotiating, because that's essentially what their agreement is right now, to kick it down the road to negotiate later. The DA has been forced into this position, either that or they don't know how to get rid of the culture of being the official opposition. And one of those two things has to change in order to have a more streamlined government. Yeah. And even though we haven't mentioned that, but it also poses the questions of what is the actual official opposition of the country doing to hold the government accountable? And so I'm very, very curious to see what the opposition, as well as the official opposition of the country, say about this speech, because it would be the first time that we hear about them.
Aren't these interesting points, Professor Kondlo? Where do you see these differences? Is there an official opposition? And what do you make of the DA being the opposition inside government?
That's a very interesting concept, actually, Dr. Chikane is raising. Opposition within government. It's part of government. Eh? They have cabinet ministers. But within that, they still push some opposition stance. It's very interesting, actually, especially when you think about the long-term sustenance of the government of national unity. How far is this thing going to go? Will these guys have the stamina to carry it the way we see it to be? There's also the issue of coming elections, especially local government elections. Because these guys, they come from different political parties, and there are dynamics within these parties.
Yes.
And those dynamics could actually push the whole arrangement in another direction, in one way or the other.
And you touch on a point that I was listening to a podcast, Tony Leon, in conversation with Peter Bruce. And Tony Leon seems to suggest that the DA has had a bloody nose over the last couple of months with the introduction of these new pieces of legislation where they have not had their way. If anything, there is now a glimmer of hope on NHI. And I think his words are, at some point, the DA is going to have to come to a decision. They're going to have to call it. Do you think that the DA has made far too many compromises that will affect it as it regards their constituency?
I think the DA needed to check thoroughly what was in the pipeline from the 6th administration and get to understand this in detail, especially in relation to the policies and what they stand for. And I don't think they did that homework very well, you see, because really NHI is from the 6th administration, the land...
the Bella Bill.
The Bella Bill, the Land Act as well, they're all from the 6th administration. And it's becoming very difficult for the DA to really stop these legislations from proceeding and getting adopted as law.
Yeah.
It's going to be very difficult. And then come election time, you see, what are they going to say to their constituencies? You see?
Dr. Chikane, let me sway the conversation a different direction now. Top of the list, if you listen to Dr. Naledi Pandor, the recent Minister of International Relations, we were talking to her this afternoon, and she is of the firm view that the economy needs urgent attention. And this coincides well, or this bodes well, for South Africa, given its G20 presidency position right now. Notwithstanding the possible scupper,
yes,
if the US has anything to do with it. Where do you think the president, or what do you think the president ought to say in terms of the performance of the economy?
So I'll say it if I was in the president's office, what I think the president will say, and then I'll give what I think he should say. In the president's office, it is, over the last 6 months since the elections, business confidence has increased, growth has been on an uptick. We had one particular quarter where unemployment seemed like it was going down, therefore it's working, right? The decisions that we're making, yeah, it's
we can
working.
Expect that kind of language from
Dinswalo, I told you about her last year, and look at the benefits of our policies this year. Right, there's a good story to tell, as Prof was saying, that it will come out, and that will be the messaging of the positivity of the turn, as well as the strength of our political institutions, and he will probably talk about how he's fixing these institutions. Now, from my perspective, growing the economy doesn't change anything. Every year, a president will tell us that we need to grow the economy. you don't need to be an economist to kind of know that simple fact. But what needs a higher level of just inquiry, not even understanding of, but when we grow the economy, even when we do that, the quality of life for South Africans doesn't fundamentally change for the majority.
Yeah.
So the question then becomes, will the president start talking about these structural changes to the economy? Will he start asking these questions about what is the structural nature of unemployment? Are we going to double down on huge-scale industrialization rather than improving logistics to take mineral resources out of the country, right? Those are two different economic programs, but have huge impacts on the nature of your economy. And these are the interesting questions. He had started this in his last SONA address, where he really was talking about new plants that will be built across the country. We haven't gotten an update as that as usual. So the question then becomes, will the speech be simply about growth, about the better relationship government has with business, big business, or will the speech be about we have a better relationship with smaller businesses and industrial businesses in particular, not just the financial and mining sector? For me, that's what I'll be looking out for in particular about the president's messaging.
Yeah. Professor Kondlo, still on the economy, surely there is some credit that is due. The load shedding situation has been turned around, notwithstanding what we saw this past week. Don't you think that there should be a certain level of positivity there?
Yes, yes. Well, things are not as bad, really. You see, the country is not going to the dogs. We would really be lying if we say that. You see. But there's still a lot of work to be done. Improving the country's infrastructure, you see. Otherwise, we'll have this continuous challenge of water problems, you see. And some of these challenges, especially water and electricity, they really deflect and turn away some very interested investors who have just come into South Africa. Focusing on infrastructure is going to be very important. But as the government does what it is supposed to do, the issue of ethical governance is going to be very important. Because a lot of stuff which is meant to serve our people, you see, you find that money is continuing to disappear. You see. When does this stop, really? You see? Because it's a drain on the economy. The issue of corruption is a serious problem that our government should actually stand up and deal with.
Yeah. Let's talk to the visuals we are seeing right now. Deputy President Paul Mashatile making his way inside the National Assembly. Your thoughts, Dr. Chikane, on the work that he does? He is the leader of government business. And he also is heading up the clearinghouse committee that is supposed to iron out issues, whether it be policy, and there has been many of those. How's he done?
Yeah, so I think the Deputy President has done fairly well. Just last week, he was addressing SALGA at their, I think their national gathering or their national conference last week, where he was really taking on this business of saying it would be my responsibility to do the coordination of national government's relationship with local government and the setup of district models across the country when it comes to the Electoral Act, when it comes to the amendments to essentially separating politics from the administration at a local government level. You see him talking about becoming this clearinghouse and being able to delegate to particular individuals to see, can we get through particular tough junctures in the GNU? So for those who don't know, the clearinghouse is the final stage. If you can't agree in a cabinet meeting, take this issue to the clearinghouse and debate it there.
Yeah.
And it's functioned...
Is that where the NHI was dealt with, by the way? Because I'm keen to hear that. There is this suggestion that the ANC and the DA got together and said, okay, we'll remove this part about phasing out the medical schemes.
The medical schemes.
Private medical schemes. We'll take that out. And are you happy? And the answer is, yes, we are happy. Okay, fine. Was that dealt with at the clearinghouse?
So from all the reporting, no, it wasn't. And this becomes this issue about what this clearinghouse is. Is it a statutory body of cabinet or is it an ad hoc body of cabinet, right? So do all issues of significance have to go to the clearinghouse or is it only particular issues? This particular one, based off the reporting that I've read, was dealt on the sidelines of the Cabinet Lekgotla and a meeting between Mamrupeni Ramaphosa, as well as John Steenhuisen, who were able to come to this conclusion around what we do with, and it wasn't an agreement, this is an important point, it wasn't an agreement of what we do with the medical aid schemes in particular. It was an agreement to create a ministerial liaison committee of some sort, an advisory
committee that will include,
the
private sector as well.
And the private sector to then renegotiate something that has already been negotiated already, right? To reopen up a conversation, and I find that process fascinating in of itself.
Isn't it just? Professor Kondlo, the health minister is interviewed on a different platform today, and he says, look, I have never, since I've worked in government, heard of legislation that is dealt with in Parliament, finalized and rubber-stamped through Parliament, that can be changed between two political parties. It's unheard of. What is going on?
I think the main job now is to nurse the unity of the government of national unity. It's actually to nurse the health of the government of national unity. And the way they do it actually, it's opening the same government of national, opening it up to a lot of criticisms by opposition parties. It's just that really the MK party and the EFF, they have their differences. Because this is the time when they should actually be standing firm and challenging what the GNU is doing or not doing.
Well, you're now swaying us to that conversation about the effectiveness of the opposition in Parliament. Do we have a solid opposition inside Parliament?
So I think I think it was good for us to give the opposition parties a pass, because there had been no culture or rules for how do you deal with a coalition government in a democratic South Africa at a national level outside of crisis, right? And you also had a brand new party becoming the official opposition in particular. So you can give them a pass for 6 months to essentially find your feet. Let's see how we figure this out. Without an official opposition in Parliament who is vocal, who understands the processes, who highlights these issues, whether you agree with them or not is irrelevant. The importance of an official opposition is to avoid this type of crisis. I won't call it a crisis, but this type of problem where government becomes a law upon itself and Parliament starts becoming a new version of a rubber stamping activity. Right? We've already dealt with that for 30 years. We don't want to do it again. And that's why we need an official opposition that takes advantage of Parliament isn't necessarily a government of national unity. Convince the other colleagues in the GNU to say on this particular issue in Parliament we're going to vote differently. Let that GNU function in the executive in particular. Let's do this contestation. Let's do the right thing to push through the right policies. Otherwise, you will get excluded when it gets to the executive level either way later on down the road. And that's the type of politics we need to start seeing from all opposition parties, in particular the official opposition, because of their privileged role in Parliament.
Dr. Kondlo, how do you feel about the standing of the opposition in Parliament right now?
Yes, I still think it's very fractured, and there's a lack of coherence. And even in issues where they stand together, they are still not making the kind of robust noise that we can understand as citizens outside. So I think opposition still has quite a lot of work. But of course, it's still early, you see, because even the government of national unity is hardly a year, you see. So we could actually say things are still forming up. Yeah. Let's hope for the best,
Let's come back to the issues of the day. Employment, or should we say in this case, unemployment. You add to that the service delivery challenges. Someone said we have an election coming up next year. Where are we on those two very important topics?
Yeah, we're not where we're supposed to be at any particular point. But I don't know if South Africans remember where we are supposed to be, right? So whenever I think about service delivery in particular, we always go back to the AG reports about how the AG is looking at the audit reports of local municipalities, whether they're functioning or not. In Johannesburg in particular, we're still dealing with issues around electricity and water shortages, right? And that's in a major metropolitan. You're talking about bad governance in rural municipalities as well. So there's a long way to go, but there is work that is being done, right? As I had mentioned before, SALGA has been doing a lot of work over the last few months I also know the Department of Cooperative Governance is now trying to redo a plan around how do we handle legislation and the development of local government in particular. The only problem is that as these plans are formulated, the longer they take, the more you leave people in squalor.
Yeah.
Right? The longer you leave people destitute, the longer you allow cities to fall apart when they do not have to fall apart in any particular way. So in my mind, we've got a way to go, but we were on the right path, at least started going down the right path in certain municipalities.
Dr. Kondlo, the visuals on the screen right now, it is the president that has emerged from that vehicle. I have no idea who is accompanying the president this year. Any clues from your end, Dr. Kondlo?
No clues at all. No clues at all.
Well, nonetheless, let's talk about this moment for him. The kind of tone he has got to strike. Yes, he's going to spell out government's plan of action, but the political tone as well. What does he say, given all of these issues that have been building up to this moment?
The political tone, I think, he's going to build on what we know his political tone to be. He's the person who politically still lives in the Mandela era. You see. Yeah, politics of compromise, accommodation, building democratic institutions, getting the youth more involved. In fact, sometimes when I listen to his politics, I feel they are a bit patronizing. We actually need something better, something more focused these days. I expected him, especially preparing a speech and a man who's leading a government of national unity. I expected him that he could put more focus on the state of solidarity in South African society. That one is very important because South Africa, besides everything else it's confronted with, there is this issue of social collapse which is facing South Africa. Go to our communities if you want to see what that means.
All right. Dr. Kondlo, we're going to have to pause there. There is the 21-gun salute that is probably going to start, and let's take in the sounds from Cape Town.